Insights is a series of career panels that our employer engagement student intern team hosts every year. So we bring together industry professionals from different industries to kind of just talk about their career journeys, their insights, and their advice for students who may be in the recruiting stage of their career journey or simply just exploring. So today's topic is going to be on careers and social impact and nonprofits. So I'm excited to have a good lineup of organizations here today. So really briefly, back. Here's the agenda and the things we'll be covering today. We're going to go over introductions and kind of get to know our panelists a little more, as well as the organizations that they work for. We'll open it up for a moderated discussion where questions that were prepared by our student interns will be asked. And then we'll turn it over to the audience to see if you all have any questions. If you don't have any questions, we'll kind of go back to some general career questions to our panelists, and then we'll be kind of closing it up. So without further ado, here's our panelist lineup. So I'm super excited to introduce you all. We'll go over kind of names, your organization, a little bit about your role, maybe a fun fact. So we'll start with Bridget.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. My name's Bridget, and I went to USC for undergrad and also for my MBA, and then I worked at Viterbi, so fight on. I'm now a senior philanthropy officer at UNICEF USA, and most of you have probably heard of UNICEF, but just a very brief overview of what UNICEF does. So UNICEF is the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, and it was created following World War II with the goal to provide aid to children who had been orphaned by the war. And today, since then it's grown, and UNICEF is in 190 countries and territories around the world and manages the world's largest humanitarian supply warehouse in Copenhagen, and does pretty much anything and everything you can imagine related to protecting children's rights. UNICEF is a nonprofit in the international development space. And my role here in the US is focused on fundraising. So in my role, I rally funding support from the American public with the goal of furthering our work to make the world more equitable for children.
Thank you, Bridget. Charlotte, would you be able to introduce yourself?
Hi, yes. Good evening, everyone. I apologize. I was having a number of technical issues, but I think I made it just in time. I'm Charlotte Lipsansky. I did my graduate work in the PhD program at the Annenberg School for Communication, and I am currently a lead advisor for social and behavior change at Save the Children. So many of you probably might be familiar with Save the Children, but we work both domestically and globally towards ensuring that every child has a healthy start in life and an opportunity to learn and be protected from harm. And in the US, that means we're working in over 200 rural communities, and we work with local partners to ensure that children have access to education, nutritious food, and other resources that they would need to thrive. And then overseas, we work in over 100 countries, and we partner with governments and local organizations to address child health, education, sexual and reproductive health, nutrition, and protection from abuse and neglect. I'm happy to see a UNICEF person here because before I joined Save the Children 2.5 years ago, I was with UNICEF in New York as well. So have been in the space of working around child rights and child protection for some time. My role at SAVE is I'm a director on a global research project that's funded by USAID, and it's called Agency for All. And that project we run research projects on different interventions in a number of different countries. All of the programs are trying to affect people's attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors, especially empowering them to make healthy choices. And then we're supporting the implementation of those programs, as well as doing some research around them so that we can understand what works in promoting healthy behaviors. So that's what I'm focused on right now at Save the Children.
Thank you so much for sharing, and I'm sensing there's going to be some more overlap in the conversation. I'll pass it on to Elise. Elise, I think you need to unmute.
It would help if I unmuted. Thank you. I'm Elise Levine. I am probably the elder stateswoman here. I did my undergrad at Mount St. Mary's in liberal arts and gerontology as an adult in their executive undergrad program. And then I came to USC as an even older adult doing my master's in gerontology. I was a philanthropic board member at the Red Cross, and kind of as what I consider one of my later acts in my work life, I joined the board that I was a board member on as the executive director of the chapter. So I'm the executive director of what we call the Northern Valleys chapter. I oversee a territory of over 2,600 square miles of the San Fernando, Santa Clarita, and Antelope Valleys. And because of some previous experience working with elected officials and interning in a congressman's office, I am also one of our state government relations reps. I think that most people know the Red Cross from either one of two things. It's usually, oh, you're the guys that go out when there's hurricanes, or you're the people that we donate blood to. But the actual mission statement is that we prevent and alleviate human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. I'm not sure of the makeup of our partner friend organizations on this call, but the Red Cross is only a 10% workforce group, and 90% of our work is done by volunteers. So that's kind of a little bit about us. And most people don't recognize that we were really started on the battlefields by Clara Barton, and our work still continues with services to the armed forces, along with our disaster relief, our blood donations, our training services. We partner with our friends at the Heart Association for CPR and first aid, and we also do lifeguard water safety training, our international services, and our volunteer services. And I'm happy to talk more about that today. So thanks.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you for that very detailed explanation. I'll pass it on to Rebecca now.
Hi, Trojans. My name is Rebecca Halloran. I graduated USC undergrad in 2014. Feels like a really long time ago. Now I feel old, especially talking to you guys, but it's really good to be here. I am currently the Senior Development Director for the American Heart Association in San Francisco. I'm in my car because we actually have a donor event at a venue right across the street. So I just bopped on over here to do this with you guys. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with the American Heart Association. Maybe in elementary school, you guys did jump rope for heart. Maybe you all have taken CPR training. If you have not, I would highly recommend it. So a bit about the American Heart Association. We are the largest nonprofit focused on cardiovascular health, obviously. We've been around for 100 years. Actually, this year marked our 100th anniversary. And cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of death in this country. So while we've spent the last 100 years making numerous scientific breakthroughs and funding policy changes for heart healthier habits, there's still a lot of work to be done. So we're entering our second century, and we've made a ton of progress. I mean, everything that you have heard about beyond just CPR in the medical field, in terms of heart health, a lot of that has been funded by the American Heart Association, because a lot of what we do in terms of our fundraising is give that directly to doctors, scientists, so that they can come up with solutions to help save our loved ones. So I am in the fundraising sphere and development. I focus in particular on fundraising for our Heart Walk campaigns, and we can get into more of that a bit later in this chat. So I'll pass it on to the next person.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thank you for joining us from the field. Last but not least, I'll pass it on to Jorge.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jorge Abedin. I do hate to say that, well, to start from the beginning, I did my bachelor's and master's at Louisiana State University. I am from South Louisiana, so I'm definitely no stranger to seeing the Red Cross coming during hurricanes. So always really appreciative of your work. But I did move out to LA to go to UCLA. I will say that I did leave UCLA after a year and a half, so don't worry, I didn't get, I didn't change too much. The IRC is a global organization. Our mission statement is basically we help people affected by humanitarian crises to survive, recover, and rebuild their lives. We were started in 1933, coincidentally by Albert Einstein. And our organization is broken up into two parts. One of them being crisis response, recovery, and development, which is our overseas operation. And then in the United States, it's broken into RAI, which is resettlement, asylum, and integration. And I work within the RAI network. So in the United States, we are a refugee resettlement agency. We've been resettling specifically in Los Angeles for 49 years. Next year will be our 50th year. We've resettled 40,000 plus refugees in that time. And we don't really brand ourselves as just a resettlement agency anymore in Los Angeles. We've expanded pretty incredibly in the last 20 or so years to become kind of a one-stop shop for all immigrants, no matter the status, for services. We have services for asylum seekers now, a case management pilot program. We have, of course, our core resettlement programming, but we also have citizenship classes, ESL classes. We have financial coaching and even loan programs for refugees and incomes of any status. And all of our programs are offered for free. So I do my role specifically is community relations and operations manager. On community relations, I'm basically, I spearhead our community partnerships. And so when a refugee comes into the United States, they're given a certain amount of direct assistance, basically direct cash. And so as community relations and operations working with supply chain, my goal every day is to take work off of the caseworkers. So by implementing new supply chain initiatives or new community partnerships to take away some of the work so they have more time to focus on the client, but also being able to maximize that direct assistance money. So finding donations, finding new community partners that will allow the client to keep more of that money that the federal government gives them so that they're not spending it on rent, on a cell phone, on housing supplies, on whatever it may be. And then I also want to shout out, I think I've shouted out the rest of the orgs too, but American Heart Association that cook the recipes online. There's a fantastic, I think it was like a zucchini enchilada recipe. So I urge everyone, to visit our website as well, but to visit that website and go look at those recipes because they are very good for the heart and they are fantastic. So thank you for having me and really appreciate all the other panelists here too.
Thank you, Jorge, for sharing about what you do at IRC. And I just enjoy seeing kind of just like the general overlap among all these amazing organizations and like just everything that goes into all your work. So thank you everyone for sharing. I know we have a lot of Trojans in our panel. So excited to kind of get into like how your journey at USC has shaped your careers. But to get us started, we'll be asking Bridget a question. Bridget, what advice would you give a student who's just becoming interested in working in the social impact or nonprofit related career, or somebody who's on the fence about it? What advice would you give them?
Great question. I think it is really important to meet with as many people as you can. So that includes all of this panel. I'm sure all of us would be very happy to talk to any of you. But my advice is to kind of meet with people, have informal chats with people, coffee chats with people. You'll probably find that many of us have also lived different lives before where we are now. I used to be a teacher with Teach for America. I worked at National Geographic for a little bit. So I'm sure all of us have various connections and things like that. And it's just kind of building and growing your network and exploring through the people that are working in the nonprofit sector, why they're working there. Does anything resonate with you? That would be my first bit of advice. And I'd say also, no job is permanent. So if you go for an internship, if you have a job, just because you have something doesn't mean you have to stay there. You can always move on to something else if it doesn't feel right when you're in it. I think that was a lesson that I have learned along the way that I didn't immediately think, there's a lot of pressure to get your first job, and have it stick. And, that's not necessarily always going to be the case, and that's okay. So those would be kind of my little bits of advice on if you're thinking about it and if you're on the fence about it, like the worst thing, you can just try it out. If it's not for you, it's not for you, and that's okay. But just try it.
Yeah, thank you for that insight and for emphasizing that careers don't have to be a linear path. It can take you in various industries, various jobs. Does anybody else want to add a little bit about, I guess, their advice to students who are just becoming interested in the field?
I'm happy to share a little bit. I think that since I came to the Red Cross, I have become intimately involved with AmeriCorps. And if that is an opportunity that you can avail yourself of, there's a lot of different opportunities in AmeriCorps, and it's a nice way to kind of like what Bridget was saying, is try it on and see how it fits. I think folks that work in our spaces usually have a passion for this work. This isn't like getting a sales job at IBM or something like that. And most people don't go into this for the money. It's because you have a passion to either, kind of do humanitarian, social impact kind of work. And if you don't have the ability to do AmeriCorps, even just volunteering with organizations can give you a little bit of a spin of, is this a good place to work? Do I like these people? What are the kind of opportunities? But right now, AmeriCorps has some amazing programs, both in public health as well as humanitarian emergency management, those kind of things. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about that.
Thank you, Elise. Anybody else?
Can I add to that? I love what Elise said about just some concrete ways to try it out through AmeriCorps. I'll just throw in an international perspective. If you're interested in international nonprofit work that similar to AmeriCorps, like Peace Corps is a fabulous way to try things out. I in my international programs division where I work at Save the Children, I think literally 2 out of 3 people were our Peace Corps alums, and it's very fun to watch everyone connect because some of them knew each other from their placements and so forth. But it's a great way to gain that experience under your belt and also, see if it's for you. So definitely want to echo that.
Yeah, and I know that they typically recruit year round, so there's plenty of opportunities that may be available on Handshake for students who are on there. I guess moving on for you, Charlotte, can you describe what led you to move toward working at nonprofits during your time as a student and in your early career?
Sorry, I missed the beginning of your question. Mind repeating it?
Of course. Can you describe what led you to move toward working at nonprofits during your time as a student and in your early career?
Sure. I think it was a little bit in my blood. Both my parents were kind of activists and, worked for social impact in various ways. So I kind of grew up around it. But then intellectually, I was really interested as undergrad in biology, and I studied animal behavior. Thought I was going to go that track, was pretty far down that track, and then realized I wanted to do something with a little bit more like human social impact. So I pivoted. I sometimes joke that I just jumped species because now I do human behavior research. So I moved from studying primates to studying, well, still studying primates, but human primates. So I took my intellectual interest in behavior and moved it into a sphere where I could do more social impact. And Annenberg School was fantastic in supporting me in that. I went in knowing that I wanted to work in the nonprofit space, and a lot of professors really supported my interest in that and through my PhD research. And I guess I would say also, in terms of advice, that it is critical to have, if you're going to enter this work, to come from a place of, having a personal mission that connects with the work that you do. But on top of that, you have to find something that you're intellectually curious about, Because I think if you, I've seen folks who come in only with the sense of mission that they might burn out, because they may, just be working with this kind of sense of drive, but not necessarily getting the joy or excitement or the intellectual curiosity that kind of carries you forward, and keeps it and keeps you energized even when you might be hitting obstacles. So I would say that, find where your passion is, align that with the mission of the organizations where you might explore working. But then also figure out what you really like to do and what you're curious about, and find a way to incorporate that into your role within the organization.
Thank you so much for sharing. Does anyone else on the panel want to kind of talk about what got them into social impact in the first place?
I can jump in. After graduation, I, like most of my friends, didn't do nonprofit work. I mean, it's kind of, it's not the most common thing, right? I think we all kind of fall into it for various reasons. I worked for a sports team. I worked in private events. And it wasn't until, personally, my grandmother ended up developing Alzheimer's. So I initially started working for the Alzheimer's Association for years and years prior to the American Heart Association. So I do feel like a lot of people fall into nonprofit because of those personal ties and passions. But the thing that I would really emphasize to folks is that there are so many different, avenues and roles and departments within each nonprofit. It's not all specifically programming. It's not specifically fundraising. You can do events. There's so many different parts of each nonprofit that heck, any of our friends could find a role there, right? There's so many different avenues within each organization. So I would just say, dig into any of your passions, any of your interests, maybe something that interests your family, maybe something that you volunteered for in the past, anything you find interesting. And there's probably a role there that would suit something that you could be good at. You could speak with any of us after if you needed ideas on kind of like how to get that research going. But I know all 5 of us work in completely different roles within each of our organizations.
Yeah, that's awesome insight. And that ties perfectly to the question we have for Elise. Because I know the American Red Cross is known for being primarily a health-related nonprofit, but as you mentioned in your introduction, you do a lot. And you specifically work in building relations with your community. So for students who may not be currently pursuing health-related majors, how would you recommend for folks to get involved in this kind of sector of nonprofits?
Yeah, thanks for that question. What's interesting is that we really, in the US, are not a health-related organization except for blood, per se. In other countries, such as in a lot of Latin countries, it's known as Cruz Roja, Red Cross in Spanish, it is a medical provider. So for immigrant populations, they often come to the States and think that we are a health-related organization. But really, my role, and like Rebecca said, so my role is unique, and that I'm a little bit of everything. I have to fundraise, I have to run a board, I have to do community relations, I have to do disaster responses. I just got back from 2 weeks in South Carolina supporting the hurricanes. So if you're looking to be a jack of all trades, master of a little, an executive director role at the Red Cross would be for you. But there are so many things. I talk to college students all the time, and even high school students, and talk about maybe they need help with public speaking. And so I encourage them to become hands-only CPR trainers, or our safety, home fire preparedness trainers, because it gives them that experience of being trained on how to present and then being able to practice it without having to go to Toastmasters or, taking a lot of speech classes outside of what they had to take as a requirement. If somebody's not sure if they want to get into medicine, we often say to them, work as a blood donor ambassador, where you're the person that makes sure that people get snacks after they donate blood, and they get the t-shirt or the socks or whatever, because there are people who think they're good around blood, and all they have to see is somebody giving blood, and then they realize that maybe phlebotomy or nursing or medicine is not the career they thought they wanted to try. So I think that, you know, there's just so many opportunities. If you have an affinity for the military, you can work in our services to the armed forces. I don't think that most people know that every person who enlists in the military in Southern California gets a welcome call from Red Cross volunteers who are welcoming their family to the military family of the Red Cross, and that we have a congressional charter where we can find embedded soldiers and bring them home when there's a family emergency. And so there's just such a plethora of things. I could talk for 20 minutes, but again, I put my email in the chat, and if anybody wants to talk about some of our services, I'm happy to meet with anybody for coffee or a beverage.
Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, I think what I'm hearing from you all is volunteer experiences is experience, period. And so students, I highly recommend you all look into volunteer experiences, especially if you're kind of on the fence with what kind of nonprofit to work for. So thank you so much for that, Elise. Our next question is for Rebecca, and kind of just moving again, like kind of into the skills section of like what it takes to work at a nonprofit. What skills do you think are essential for students who hope to work in the nonprofit sector, and anything from hard to soft skills, like what would help a student stand out when they're applying for whether it be internships or full-time opportunities?
So off the bat, you guys being here alone shows that you're probably pretty empathetic people. I think that's probably one of the most just like innate skills that someone would have to have, is having that true, genuine ability to be empathetic. Because in our field, that's, you know, we're dealing with some pretty heavy diseases, some big causes, some really important things that mean a lot to a lot of people. So being able to have that ability to be genuine and empathetic, being able to put yourself in the shoes of another person is super important. I think another skill, something that I personally took away from USC that I remember very specifically, was the public speaking class that I took through Annenberg. I think that was the most important class that I personally took in college. I think it helps you build a confident voice. It helps you, you know, put your thoughts in order on that little note card. I remember it so well. And be able to stand in a room of people that you may not feel qualified to be speaking in front of, but if you're saying it confidently and able to sell them on this dream, right, of a vision of a better future, of more health for folks in our country, then you're really able to do that with strong public speaking skills. So I would definitely say practice as much as you can on public speaking. Practice, you know, your writing skills. I guess just being organized. I would say probably for all of us, like, because we do so many different roles within our organization, probably being organized is the other big skill that I would take away. I mean, really, you guys, I would say empathy goes the furthest. If you're able to make connections and steward your donors and your constituents, and really have rapport building skills where you're able to connect with people, that goes a long way. And that's not just in our business, that's in every business. So if you can start with that, you already have got a foot and a half in the door.
Thank you for sharing that. Does anyone have any other insights into the skills they think are essential or our students should be thinking about developing during their time here at USC?
I would say networking is so important. And also, you know, so Bridget and I are in very different demographics. And it's so funny because folks my age that I work with are very much like still in that mindset, that Gen X mindset of like, you know, you're going to have your job forever. And we've seen that that's not the case. But if you're committed to the nonprofit world, and you know that's where you're going to be, then you're going to be a director of development at multiple organizations and hopefully moving up the ladder. But you want to always maintain that you're not burning bridges, because the person that used to supervise you could now supervise you again at another place. And I'm always a connector. Like, so when I go to meetings, I'm always grabbing cards or QR codes or whatever. And then I'm connecting with folks on LinkedIn or sending a note to them later, just it was great meeting you, blah, 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 because you just never know. You're following them on LinkedIn and they're posting for a friend that has an opening at the Alzheimer's Association that would be a perfect fit. You can now go back to them for that introduction, because introductions are 100% helpful in, getting an interview, getting your foot in the door.
Good advice. Any other insights into skills?
Maybe I could add around the soft skills, that I think it's important, like, I'm not really sure what you call this skill, almost like improvisation, but just being flexible, and okay with ambiguity. It is a sector where things change a lot, like, a disaster happens and all of a sudden your programming priorities shift to adjust to that, funding changes, you're dealing with heavy topics that in responding to real world conditions around them. So I think it's really important to be okay with that and know, okay, things are going to change, the ground might shift under my feet, and I'm going to be, and I've got the skills to pivot and adjust and improvise and take it in stride. I think that's really important. And then around the people skills, I would say that the people who really meant the most in my career and who I value working with the most are those people who will listen more than they talk, and will listen to what everyone in the room is saying and what their interests are, and then be able to suggest a way to move forward that actually, helps everybody. So having that sort of like abundance mindset, of like there's enough for all of us, how can we all move forward together, and bringing that into how you interact with people is really helpful in our sector. I mean, anywhere, I think.
Thank you so much for that advice, Charlotte. Any final remarks?
I would say this is a great time to, and it may shift over time, but craft your why. Why are you interested in what you're interested in? Just writing it out, your elevator pitch in a way. But always being able to come back to that in the chaos of the day to day will continue to ignite that spark and excitement for the work that you're doing and remind you of why you're doing it. And I think that's probably true no matter what career you go into, but just creating that why statement for yourself, your own personal mission that you can always come back to. Like Elise was saying earlier, it's going to carry you through whatever else is going on and allow you to be adaptable, like Charlotte was saying.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, and to our students, in one way or another, our office and your school-based career center has workshops and resources that kind of align to a lot of these things, networking, creating your like why. So definitely, there's opportunities to kind of grow these skills during your time here at USC. Moving on to Jorge, we have a question for you. I know some people, Charlotte and Rebecca, you've kind of touched upon this, but especially, at the IRC, just kind of working with people living under very difficult circumstances, how do you navigate the emotional aspect of your work while also maintaining, your own well-being and ensuring that, you provide the best support to those in need?
Yeah, I mean, obviously all these questions overlap. And, to Elise's point earlier, and I think Charlotte made it as well, but we all wear so many hats. Like, it's really easy to get lost in the work sometimes. But personally, before I was at the IRC, I mentioned I was at UCLA for a PhD program, and it sucked the life out of me. And it was bad for my mental health. And I tried my best, and I took some time off, and it led me to just some really troubling places with my mental health. And so knowing your limits and being very aware of your body, and knowing, when enough is enough, and knowing that, again, like we talked about earlier, one job isn't your whole life. You can career pivot anytime, and you will land safely, even though it is very difficult to get a job at this time. But everything does work out. For me, it worked out pretty beautifully, even though I was, in a tough situation before. But with work specifically at the IRC, yeah, it gets really, sometimes clients will get mad at you. You'll even have donors that get really mad at you. And the way I look at it is aligning yourself with the mission, because it's something that you care about. I think Elise said it earlier, we're not salespeople at IBM. We really care about what we're doing. So being aligned with the mission of the place that you work at is very important, and it'll really carry you through, a lot of difficult situations. But also, one saying that I always have is, if everything's urgent, then nothing's urgent. Like, get your work, the work that's urgent will be there tomorrow. It'll be there today. Not to say, obviously I'm not talking about being lazy, because everyone that ends up being in these roles ends up being really motivated and really determined. But yeah, there's no reason to push yourself beyond the limits, because like I said, you're aligned with your mission. So, and since we're all basically grant funded, you are an asset. You're, the nonprofit, the organization invests in you, and that is your whole being. It's not just, who you are from 9 to 5. So if you're pushing yourself past your limit, then it's going to impact client, program delivery. It's going to impact your team. So it puts a little bit on yourself. You just, like I said, you need to know your body, you need to know your limits, and know that, again, we're all trying. That's why I tell my coworkers all the time, we're trying our best. We're in such a difficult place. Just that empathy transfers over from, programs to, life in the office. And I've really, I don't know, you can meet everybody here on the panel, and I can get the sense that these work environments are all stressful, but everybody really cares about you. At least in our, in my organization, I assume the rest, everybody knows how difficult it is. Everybody knows how much work everyone else is doing. So again, it's about the mission, and it's about compliance, but it's not at the risk of your own health. So yeah. And then I also like to keep a robust level of activities outside of my life. I embroider. I've been really into cooking, and I have these fantastic cocktail recipes that I've made up all on my own. So remembering that life outside of work does exist, even when it is a mission driven, because it is very easy to slip into making, refugee resettlement, my whole life, but it is a job at the end of the day, even though it is mission driven. So a little bit of balance when it comes to, being dedicated to the mission, but then yourself and, having a full life is still available working for a nonprofit.
Thank you for sharing, personal insight into your journey and navigating this. I think it's tough, especially in this industry, to kind of have that work-life balance, especially when what you're working on is just very emotional. Do any of our other panelists want to share a little bit about how they've navigated kind of just managing that emotional aspect of your job, or maybe what you do to kind of keep yourself well?
Therapy. Mental health care is not to be shameful or anything like that. For those of us who work, raising money is really hard, and that's part of my job, and it's very stressful. And you have national or international, leadership coming down on you, goals and incrementals and all of that. And then those of us who work on the front lines with clients, we're dealing with, people in their darkest hour sometimes. And there is a thing called compassion fatigue. And what I am noticing in our volunteers that like to deploy on a lot of our missions, they go out for 2 weeks. I was 2 weeks in South Carolina. They went out, the volunteers were going out every night to eat, and on their days off, they were talking about that they were drinking. I personally don't drink just because I don't drink, but I could see that can turn up as a coping skill, much like it does for nurses, much like it does for law enforcement, first responders. So, you guys who are younger and getting into this, at an early age, are blessed with things like EAPs and mental health benefits. And even if you don't have them, I have telehealth every Saturday morning. I have a chat with my therapist, so that I can prevent that, because every time you go to a fire, every time you go to a disaster, it weighs on you. And if you're dealing with this work on a day-to-day basis, and when you're new and you're trying to be the best at it, like Jorge said, like embroider, play Candy Crush, whatever it is, but you got to do stuff outside, pickleball, whatever, because you'll be 30 and burned out.
Thank you for being vulnerable about, therapy. I know that sometimes, not very comfortable for people to talk about, but it's super important to kind of take care of yourself in these fields. Bridget, I see you unmuted. Do you want to?
Yeah, in that line, I don't work directly in emergency response like Elise does, but I consume the content all the time, and I am required to talk about it all the time, particularly when something has just happened. Like that's, when you spring to action and you need to speak with all of your donors right away. And there's very little time to process what you're actually even consuming and then sharing out and talking about. And through so many different emergencies that I've worked on, therapy, of course, yes, I fully agree with that. But also, I've learned for myself, my personal boundaries, that I can't scroll on social media. I'm already consuming it as part of my job, and I can't have CNN on the background all day. I can't have content just outside of, the bounds of what I'm already receiving. I can't overdo it. And I also do, very thankfully, my friends and family understand when I ask, I can't talk about it right now, setting those boundaries, because not everybody's day-to-day job is like in the weeds on a lot of the very tragic things that we see. And so on their time, they have time and want to talk about these things, but it may not be the best thing for you if that's what you're already doing on the day to day. So just setting those boundaries, taking care of yourself, is very important.
Thank you for sharing. Charlotte, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think everything that's been said is like golden, and I endorse it all. I would also add that like knowing yourself even before you get into the career, and knowing what kind of change maker you are, because some people want to be right on the front line where there's an emergency and they're energized by that. You don't have to, but that you can still be mission driven and not be that person. Maybe you're more comfortable in a role, like you get joy throwing parties, and then maybe you want to work in the fundraising and putting on fundraising events, or maybe you're comfortable with numbers and you don't want to be looking at the images all day, and you can work in the accounting department. And I think someone else on the panel talked about how many different roles there are. So even before you get, I think, to the level of burnout, and we've talked about some great coping skills for that, maybe it's helpful to try to avoid it by thinking about like, what is the most sustainable way for me to make change that won't drain me, and find a role that is in line with that.
Absolutely. Thank you all for kind of just sharing. Rebecca, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just have one last tidbit. Comparison is the thief of joy, right? And I think at the end of college and after college, there's this big hustle of like, what am I going to get into? What am I going to do? What are my friends doing? What are they making? Where are they going to live? Right. And it's really stressful. And I think if you find something, maybe it's nonprofit, maybe it's something else that you get some sort of joy out of and satisfaction, and you walk away at the end of the day being like, I made a difference. I did something good. And that feels good to me. And you could be proud to tell somebody else about what you did today. That's what's important. And I think finding that is so key. A lot of times in nonprofit, it's, I'm in fundraising, I get 9 no's in a row, and that feels so personal. I'm like, how could you not want to give to the Alzheimer's Association or to the American Heart Association? You don't care about heart health or brain health, right? And it feels so personal, and that can really be discouraging. But you get that one yes, and it brings it all back, right? Like it's such a high, and you're like, I brought in money, I fundraised, I made a difference. And no matter what your friends are doing, what your colleagues are doing. If that feels good to you and you can walk away at the end of the day with that little high, that's all that matters.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thank you all for kind of just talking about the highs and lows of working in this kind of field. I think it's super important for students to also kind of think about this part of their jobs and, you know, what they're comfortable with and kind of just learning how to put those boundaries up sooner rather than later. So that is kind of like the conclusion of all the questions that we have. I wanted to pass it over to the students that are in attendance. I have a question already, but for students, this is your time to kind of ask questions. You can direct it to one panelist or to all panelists, but if you have any questions, any insights, either use the raise hand feature or send it in the chat. If you're uncomfortable with sending in the chat, you can send it directly to me. But yeah, please ask away. This is a great time to, again, implement what they're saying, network, and kind of just get more insight into the organizations and careers that our panelists can share on. Elizabeth, I'll pass it on to you and you can unmute.
Hi, thank you so much, y'all, for coming out tonight. I really do appreciate it. I came in at 5:30, so I'm not sure if this was discussed already, but I just wanted to gain more insight about being able to learn how to get like your foot in the door when it comes to entering one of these fields. I feel like for myself, when it comes to networking, it can be a little harder to do so. Not just because I'm an introvert, but sometimes it's really hard to get into those spaces and places if you don't really feel you've been represented in those places historically. So I was kind of wondering, what advice do y'all have when it comes to being able to network and get your foot into the door in these different career paths? What has been the most fruitful advice you've received about this?
I could add something here. Thanks for that question, Elizabeth. That's really great. And yeah, I can tell you how difficult it is, especially sometimes, I don't know about my colleagues here, but getting a job at one of these kind of bigger global NGOs, you know, national organizations is pretty difficult. It took me a while to get my position at the IRC. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, but I want to reiterate volunteering. You can always volunteer as much or as little as your time. I can't imagine there are going to be many organizations that are going to turn you down. A lot of the times they just want, you know, engagement. They want people excited about their work to share their work. So volunteering is just, I think, the best way to get a glimpse into the work that they're doing. And a lot of the times, you know, we're all doing a billion things at once. I imagine that a lot of us here are recruiting for roles too, like, you know, hiring, but also on top of the other jobs we have, like a lot of HR, blah, blah, blah. And if you're in the right place at the right time, you can easily slide into the right role, especially if everybody knows you at an office or, you know, at an organization. I think because it is very hard to network in nonprofits sometimes, besides just going to events and everything, that isn't the same as like, you know, going to, you know, there aren't as many job fairs for us because we're not always paying to be at the job fairs because of budget, you know. So volunteering, I think, because then you can find other organizations through that organization and then you might find your right fit. But like I said, networking that way, the amount of people that we hire at our office, we're almost all former clients, and then also basically all former volunteers or interns. So yeah, that's, I think, the easiest, best, and even a fun way to be as engaged as you want to be, because like I said, you know, you don't have to be volunteering, you know, that many hours a week. Could just be a couple hours a week, but remote, you know, in person too. But yeah.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it as a first-gen student, just to kind of know those ins and outs of the professional workplace.
And Elizabeth, I don't know if you were on when I talked about AmeriCorps, but AmeriCorps is also a great way to get 10 months experience in a nonprofit NGO. Or Peace Corps was mentioned, some of the other organizations. I can tell you that the Red Cross, you know, we run so lean. I said we have 10% paid staff, 90% volunteers. So we are looking, when we're hiring, we're looking for people that can hit the ground running. So, you know, if it's in our comms or marketing department, in that case, these are people who have volunteered for the Red Cross, but also have a comms or marketing background. People with emergency management backgrounds can sometimes get in the door, but if you come in from being a volunteer, that's like the best way to get in because you already know the organization and you can, we're running from crisis to crisis so that you can really hit the ground running. So if you need any help with AmeriCorps, just reach out.
I've actually done 3 years with AmeriCorps. I love the organization.
Oh, so who did you do your AmeriCorps with?
My first year was my senior year of high school with a community resource center. And then my last 2 years of AmeriCorps was actually with AmeriCorps Jumpstart. So I was tutoring students, preschoolers, actually, English language learning preschoolers in the surrounding USC schools.
Yeah, reach out if you want to talk more. I'd be happy to help.
Gotcha. Thank you so
So remember, if you want to ask your questions directly to the panelists, you can raise your hand. We have a question from somebody in the audience who wanted to ask, and this is just for any of the panelists, how to navigate working toward financial security and freedom in this field. It was said earlier that most don't enter the sector for the money, but it's still a very realistic concern for the student, and I can imagine many of the students here. They personally don't have like a safety net, so they're not sure how to balance this ideal and reality. So any insights on that?
I love this question. It's a question I had when I was considering going into the nonprofit sector myself. And clearly, as someone who got an MBA, I was very atypical doing that, knowing that my classmates were making 3-4 times as much as I was going to be. But yeah, it's a reality that we all have to pay bills. We all have to, you have a life you want to live. For me personally, I ended up leaving the classroom because it wasn't sustainable financially or just time-wise, knowing that I wanted to have a family. And I will say it's really important. I, at one point, was interviewing for 5 or 6 different nonprofits for the same kind of role. And you could be offered vastly different salaries. So explore what those look like. Generally, I think all of the folks that are representing orgs here, we're all with pretty big brands, pretty big organizations that you've probably already heard of. In my experience, I've generally found that larger, more well-known orgs tend to be able to pay more than smaller places. But yeah, you'll kind of explore that as you go and as you start seeing what different places can offer. But there's a wide spectrum, and you can definitely find financial security within the nonprofit sector. And I'm happy to talk to anyone more about like what I've figured out along the way, even doing fundraising work, for instance, at USC. You'll probably be pretty decently paid for something like that. And I think all of us can share those kinds of insights with you, but it's a very real concern and something that we do have to think about. So, great question.
Can I add a couple things to that? It is a fantastic question. And the first thing I'll say is that it's not a question that will have one like that you'll answer and then be done. I ask myself that question every few years, and the answer changes because your life circumstance is changing. So the answer for me was very different when I was right out of grad school and having to pay off huge student loans. Then once those were more under control, then I felt a little more relaxed and like I had more flexibility. Then I had a kid, and then that changed it. So you will constantly revisit that question for yourself as your responsibilities and financial needs change, and that's healthy. The other thing I would say is that I think because this field attracts people who have a real mission-driven sense and something they want to do and contribute in the world, that it's easy for folks who have that to undersell themselves and say, oh, well, I just, I don't want to ask for too much because I care about the cause, or I just really want to work here. And so that maybe we don't negotiate as much as we should, I think, especially for women. So I would maybe while you're there, at USC, I'm sure your career center probably has some resources on like how to negotiate salaries and things like that. I would definitely, like if I could go back to talk to past me, when I was still at USC, I would go and take all of those because every time I've changed jobs, it's been a point of stress where I'm like, oh, well, I shouldn't ask for more, but I need more. And so just kind of learning to ask for what you need and what you value yourself as is a really important skill.
Scarlett, and yes, we do have negotiating resources. You can always schedule an advising appointment if you want to talk about your personal circumstances. But I know we also have various workshops throughout the semester concerning negotiating. I guess the final question that we have, I don't know, Elizabeth, did you have another question, or I don't know if you still have just your hand raised?
Oh, sorry, I still had my hand raised.
No worries. Yeah, so I guess final question, and I think this is more catered towards the Trojans that we have on the panel. And I know that Bridget, you've kind of already started, kind of talking about it in the chat, but I guess like what experiences, what things do you recommend for current students to kind of take advantage of at USC to, have a jump start into their career in nonprofits, and what can they do now? Having been at USC at some point.
Yeah, I can elaborate on the Brittingham Social Enterprise Lab. I was introduced to them during my MBA program, but I know they also do work with undergrad students. They have an amazing network. And so they also are willing to they helped me really sit down and explore, like, what is it? Like, what role do I want to play in a nonprofit? And that's what helped me figure out that I wanted to be in the fundraising lane of working in a nonprofit. And so they'll work very closely with you to figure out, introduce you to people, and not just any people, but like founders of organizations or CEOs of nonprofits. And there's no more time when people are more willing to talk to you than when you're a student. So this is the time to like hit up LinkedIn, to reach out to those people, because no one will say no to you as a student. And you have a real opportunity there. I also would be remiss to say that not say that we have a UNICEF club at USC. So there's also that, if anyone wants to join and participate and and I don't know for the other orgs that are on the call, if there's UNICEF or like if there's related clubs at USC and there's chapters, but maybe you could start one if there's not. So those are the two kind of USC specific things that I would say is like, look for those nonprofit clubs, but also the Brittingham Social Enterprise Lab is a kind of a hidden gem, but incredibly, incredibly useful.
Anybody else kind of want to add specific?
I don't pay for LinkedIn, and so honestly, I just don't care if people see that I stalk them on their page or look them up or whatever, some people get all weird about it, but I'm old and I don't care. But my recommendation is if there's organizations that you're interested in, learning more about, look up the organization on LinkedIn and look up and see if there's any USC alums, that are working for those organizations, or and I thank the 5 or 6 people that already connected with me on LinkedIn, and to the panel, I've already sent you invitations as well. But yeah, a fight on goes a long way. Like, I'll be somewhere, and if I'm wearing anything USC, our COO, he went back, he's doing a veterans MBA, so he's always wearing his USC gear. And when we go out somewhere, and he's got it on, and conversations just start. So if you're not somebody, like, I'm the kind of person who I'm getting business cards like in the airport, on the plane, I'm talking to people. You know, it doesn't matter that you're like an astrophysicist and I have no connection to you right now. But someday I'm going to be talking to somebody and they're going to be like, hey, do you know any astrophysicists? And I'm going to be like, oh, yeah, Dave, I met on the flight to Chicago, and reach out to him. Not everybody has that kind of memorization skill. But if you do, I highly recommend using it, and, you know, really using the UCLA Alumni Network is really strong, and it's there for a reason. And it's been 14 years since I graduated, but I still, you know, am using that network to connect with folks. So start now before you even graduate.
So glad people are connecting with you already. Anyone else kind of just want to offer final remarks?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, my experience is different. I was in a grad program, but I imagine that it's available to undergrads as well. The professors are amazing, and some of them are doing really deep work in the community. So, you know, get to know them, take the classes of those who are really engaged in the community in ways that you admire, and, you know, go to their office hours, ask them if you can help. There were also classes offered at the grad level, and I'd be curious to know if there are any for undergrads, where part of the course was the course assignment was that you go and do work with a nonprofit. I did a research project for a South Asian immigrant organization, and so, you know, if there are available opportunities like that available to an undergrad, I think that there's nothing like that. So I would encourage looking for those. And I had one more thing to say, but I've just forgotten it. I'll put it in the chat if it comes back to me.
Yeah, just a quick add to that. I was thinking the same thing, Charlotte, of like the service learning courses. I did the same thing in undergrad. I taught ESL at like a middle school, and that is, you can see, propelled me to where I am now. But one thing I do want to notice, because I'm meeting with a lot of universities. I met with Myra last week about how we could work with the, you know, USC Career Center. You also do have the, I mean, I think the most amazing thing would be if I on Monday got an email from a student wanting to set up like a service learning class with us. Like, that is high level, you know, motivation and, you know, initiative, which, so I'm not asking, I mean, I wouldn't say no, but you're able to do that too. Like, that, it starts with the students, it starts with the org. Like, you know, if you have an interest in an organization and you want it to be, you know, you can find a way to do it for college credit. I did another class in my grad school working with the Venda Museum in Culver City too, because I was studying Russian for a long time. So like, if these orgs are so much more approachable than you may think, they will say yes, because they always need help, and universities are also there backing you up every step of the way. So
I could add one last thing. Aside from utilizing USC in itself, I also would encourage you guys to utilize LA as a whole. You all are really blessed to be in such a diverse and populated and massive city that has so many opportunities. I mean, there are hundreds of local organizations, and almost all, if not all, national organizations have offices in LA. So I would say go to as many events as you can. Like, go to nonprofit runs and walks and fundraisers, and just kind of just see what they're about. And that's a great way to, you know, you're not committing to an internship, you're not signing up to volunteer for a year, but just to kind of get your foot in the door that way, see who you can meet, see what these types of events are like, you know, and get involved really by using what's at your doorstep in the entire LA community. So that's my last piece of advice.
Really awesome advice. Thank you all for the panelists for just your insightful advice and tips, and just like general like career insights. I think these are going to be super helpful to our students watching. The students, make sure you get, you know, the emails of folks that they dropped in the chat. And thank you so much for attending this session. This is our second to last session of these career panels. We do have one final one in kind of like a similar field, law and advocacy. So if you're interested in continuing on these conversations, but more on the legal side, be sure to check that out. We also have industry-based recruitment workshops that will be geared to the nonprofit social impact field. So definitely check those out. And we also have a peer-to-peer networking event. So again, you can kind of build on these networking skills with your, fellow students who have had internships over the summer and can also share their insights as USC students. All of this information is on Handshake, so just be sure to continue to register and, network with us and your fellow students. But again, thank you so much for the panelists and to everyone that attended the session. It's been so much fun to kind of learn about all your organizations and all that you do. So thank you so much and fight on. Bye everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Fight on.